arraigned in federal court. Right up until the time you post bail, you have to pledge assets. They put potentially an ankle monitor around your ankle if you're bailed out in some instances. Right up until the time that reality sets in and your attorney has a come to Jesus meeting with you, and it goes something like this. You know, if you're convicted, you're going to potentially face 15 or 20 years in the federal system, and you're only going to get credit off for 10 or 15%, and you're going to serve a lot of time unless you roll over and you provide information on somebody higher up the food chain. That discussion has a tendency to really bring a lot of clarity to the choice, and I think that that's exactly what's going to happen here.
And he's got daughters, so that's obviously a discussion.
And I understand he's a wonderful father and he loves his kids, and I respect that. But that's going to have a lot to do with the decision.
And that's a conversation that other men in the president's orbit have had to have with their loved ones, his deputy campaign chairman. When you look at the people in the president's orbit who have been charged with crimes or who have pleaded guilty, where does Cohen fit in? Better, worse, similar? Were they all in the same line of work? I mean, just, you know, you have this case that is separate but not completely different. And now you've got some of the same federal prosecutors or federal investigators who were referred this case by the Mueller probe. What's your sense of just the Comey book is in the news. He's described the president's team as a mob family. What's your sense from being almost on a parallel track, but now very much involved in litigation with someone deep inside Donald Trump's orbit?
Here's what I'll say. I think Cohen is similar to Sammy the Bull, who rolled on Gotti. Okay, this is Cohen.
Was prosecuted by Mueller, I think, or
correct?
Cohen.
No, to Mueller.
Mueller, yeah.
So Sammy the Bull to Gotti is what Cohen is to Trump. So from a liability standpoint to the president, I don't think it gets any worse than Michael Cohen, with the exception of perhaps Mr. Schiller, who I think also knows where a lot of the bodies are buried. But right now, as we look at the landscape, this is about the worst person the president could have in the crosshairs is Michael Cohen. And furthermore, because, and you know I'm not a big fan, I don't think the guy's that smart. I don't think he did a good job of covering his tracks. We now find out that he may have actually made audio recordings of some of his conduct, which have now been seized, if the reports are true, by law enforcement. I mean, that's a disaster.
Let me follow up on two things. One, there was a report in the New York Times that Donald Trump called Michael Cohen on Friday. What do you think that conversation was about?
Well, I don't know what it was about, but it wasn't smart. I mean, that's like...
Think he offered to pardon him of anything, or...?
You know, he probably called him with an attaboy and told him he had his back. And, you know, we know how loyal the president can be, which isn't very. So, you know, I don't know what is going on the other side. I mean, this is... you know, these guys are making up as they go along. They're not being smart. I just don't get it.
So the second name you just raised was Kurt Schiller, and we should just remind our viewers who Kurt Schiller was to the president. He went into the White House, Keith Schiller. He went into the White House as his body man. When John Kelly came in as the new chief of staff, he was pushed out. But who was he to Stormy Daniels? What was her interaction with Mr. Schiller?
Well, she routinely interacted with him and on more than one occasion as it related to meetings with the president and rendezvous with the president. So she had a lot of contact with him. I think a lot of women had a lot of contact with him. So he absolutely knows a lot of details about the president and his life. But I'm not aware of any crimes that he may have committed, and so I want to be really clear.
You're talking about him as
that.
a possible witness to everything.
Correct. I'm talking to him about him as a possible witness. But this Michael Cohen development is significant, and it is a potential big bombshell.
For the president.
100%, no question.
Let me ask you about the other bombshell yesterday. Were you in the courtroom when attorneys had to reveal that one of Mr. Cohen's other clients was none other than Sean Hannity?
I absolutely was.
Take us inside that.
And, well, so there was about 20 minutes of foreplay or lead up to this, moment. I'm sorry, but there was. And there was a lot of back and forth. Michael Cohen's attorney was arguing vehemently with the judge that he should not have to disclose this name. He then offered to disclose it confidentially, what they call in-camera review, which is only for
just
the judge. Just to the judge. And this went on and on and on. I mean, it was a long argument. A lot of people weighed in on it. And ultimately, the judge ordered him to disclose the name. And instead of writing it down, which I thought most certainly he would do, because what you hope is that the judge will get the note and open it and decide, you know, maybe we're going to take a pause. I want to think about this, etc. He said, well, I'll just announce it orally. The client's name is Sean Hannity. And no one could breathe because all the air was sucked out of the courtroom. I mean, there was audible gasp, and people looked around like, did he just say Sean Hannity? And all of a sudden, about 8 or 10 journalists stood up and rushed out of the courtroom because you don't have your cell phones in federal court.
We know. We were waiting for them.
Right.
We sat here waiting for them to the cameras. Let me ask you what you think Sean Hannity's, just sort of the range of potential involvement is for between Mr. Cohen and Sean Hannity. Interesting new development in that there's no more fierce defender of Donald Trump and Mr. Cohen. Mr. Cohen's been on Sean Hannity's program more than a dozen times than Hannity. It's certainly an interesting development.
There's no evidence, to be clear, that Sean Hannity did anything. Michael Cohen represented Sean Hannity in anything untoward or anything that people would be outraged by. I want to be really clear about that.
Yeah, and Sean's saying it was real estate. He texted me during yesterday's show.
And that may be true. I mean, we don't know. What I do know is this. I know there's documents that were seized in connection with the raids with Sean Hannity's name or involvement on the documents. Now, how do I know that? Because the context in which this was raised was the names of clients that would be whose documents would be protected in the event of a review in connection with the case. So if there were no documents, Sean Hannity's name doesn't come up. It doesn't make any sense.
So take me to law school for a second. So they keep losing all of these arguments they're trying to make to protect attorney-client privilege. And the president's so mad about that he's been tweeting since the raid, attorney-client privilege is dead. What sorts of things are big enough to make a judge constantly rule on the side against protecting attorney-client privilege?
Well, I think they're seeking an overexpansive view of the attorney-client privilege by way
the Trump-Cohen side.
Correct, by way of their arguments, and I think that's a significant problem for them. Make no mistake, the attorney-client privilege is alive and well in the United States. Okay, I know the attorney-client privilege. I like the attorney-client privilege. The attorney-client privilege is a friend of mine. Okay, it's alive and well. But what you can't do is you can't use the attorney-client privilege to go out and commit a crime or engage in conspiracies and then rely on it in order to hide information. That does not work, and it's not going to work in connection with this case.
For a federal judge to have decided to go ahead with this raid of Cohen's home and offices, what must they have determined was at risk to violate what you just described as being alive and well, attorney-client privilege?
Well, the bar that the prosecutors had to pass in order to go out and get these warrants of Michael Cohen, because of how high profile he is and because he's at the right hand of the president, significantly greater than if they wanted to execute a warrant on my office or your office. I can assure you that. This had to go through a number of layers of review. A magistrate judge had to find that there was probable cause of a crime. From the documents that were released, it appears that they provided evidence that perhaps Michael Cohen was on the verge of destroying documents or was taking steps to destroy documents, which gave rise to an urgency. And one thing, I don't think a lot of people have talked about this, and I want to raise this. This is rather remarkable, Nicole, if you think about it, because you have the President of the United States going to a judge, a federal judge, and basically saying, I don't trust my own Justice Department to do me right.
He says that every day.
Right. I don't trust the Justice Department. Mm-hmm. Remember, the Justice Department is part of the executive branch. Mm-hmm. I don't trust my own Justice Department to do right by me and do the upstanding thing and to engage in an ethical manner. I mean, that's remarkable. And
let me just last question. What about your case do you think intersects with whatever case they made to that federal judge who made this extraordinary ruling to let them go in and seize everything in boxes and to take images on the spot of all of Mr. Cohen's records? What do you think? Do you think there was an intersection between what you were suggesting Mr. Cohen had been involved in? We know that the FBI seized documents related to the payment to your client, related to the payment to Ms. McDougal, related to the Access Hollywood tape. They're obviously looking for other instances where Mr. Cohen paid women to shut up. Where is the intersection between your case specifically, which is about invalidating an NDA, and that raid on Monday?
Well, it could be by way of money laundering. It could be by way of bank fraud, or it could be by way of campaign finance violations as it relates to this $130,000 payment. And, you know, we could very easily see charges in either of those three spheres in connection with this $130,000 payment. I mean, remember, Al Capone was not convicted. This is only one example. Al Capone was not convicted of murder. He was convicted of tax evasion.